The boardroom lights glared against the polished glass table as Mason Trent stood at the front, laser pointer in his perfectly manicured hand. His voice carried across the room with practiced confidence as he clicked through slides I had spent countless nights perfecting. Thanks to my leadership and innovative vision, this product launch is completely ready for our investors, he announced, gesturing toward the screen displaying my algorithm, my code, my 6 months of life. I sat in the corner, watching him present my work like it had sprung from his own brilliant mind. Every slide contained my research, my problem-solving, my late-night breakthroughs. The distributed processing system that would revolutionize how our company handled data was mine from conception to completion. Yet Mason stood there, basking in applause that should have been mine. When he caught my eye across the room, that familiar smirk spread across his face. The same expression he wore whenever he reminded me about playing the game or understanding hierarchy. I wanted to scream, to stand up and expose his lies right there. Instead, I forced myself to smile back, my hands clenched beneath the table. That was the moment I decided I would let him finish his performance. Then I would finish him. The investors crowded around Mason after his presentation, shaking his hand like he was some kind of tech genius. I remained in my corner seat, invisible to everyone except the rage burning in my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched him accept praise for work that had consumed my entire life for 6 months. When Thomas Caldwell, our biggest potential investor, approached Mason and said, "Brilliant algorithm work, Harper really outdid herself," I held my breath. This was Mason's chance to give credit where it was due. Instead, he smoothly interrupted with his rehearsed line, "Harper is a valuable part of my support team. I guide the vision, she handles the technical execution." Support team. Technical execution. Like I was some code monkey following his grand design instead of the architect who had built this entire system from scratch. The words hit me like physical blows, and I literally choked on the air I was trying to breathe. Mason hadn't just stolen my work. He had erased my name from it completely, reducing me to a footnote in my own creation. The hallway felt endless as I walked toward the elevators, my legs shaking from adrenaline and fury. Mason's footsteps echoed behind me, getting closer until I felt his hand clap down on my shoulder with false camaraderie. His expensive cologne burned my throat as he leaned close enough for me to smell the coffee on his breath. "You're really talented, Harper," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you need to learn how to play the game if you want to advance in this industry. Sometimes you have to step back and let leadership take the spotlight. Play the game." The phrase made my skin crawl because I knew exactly what he meant. Stay quiet, accept scraps, and watch men like him climb ladders built from my work. His assumption that I would just accept this theft made me see red, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. "I understand," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt inside. What I didn't say was that I had just learned the most important rule of his game: never show your anger until you can show results that destroy them. The bathroom stall became my sanctuary as I locked the door behind me and finally allowed myself to break down. Silent tears streamed down my face as I stared at my reflection in the metal door, watching my composure crack after holding it together for 2 hours. 6 months of my life flashed before my eyes, missed dinners with friends, weekends spent debugging code, empty coffee cups stacked on my desk like monuments to my dedication. All of it taken with one PowerPoint presentation and a few well-placed lies. Mason had stolen my algorithm, my innovation, my future, and presented it to investors like it was his own brilliant creation. The betrayal felt like a physical wound in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I whispered to my distorted reflection in the metal, "Not yet. You're going to get it all back." The words felt like a promise I was making to myself, a contract written in fury and determination. Mason thought he had won, but this was just the beginning. Step 1 was already forming in my mind: collect irrefutable proof of what he had stolen. My apartment felt different when I got home that night, like the familiar space had been transformed by my new purpose. I pulled out my personal backup drive, the one Mason didn't know existed, and plugged it into my laptop with trembling hands. The screen filled with folders containing every draft, every code commit, every time-stamped update from the past 6 months. Everything was there in perfect chronological order. Initial concept documents with my name as the sole author. Code repositories showing my commits and contributions. Email threads where I had explained complex technical concepts to Mason when he couldn't understand the basics. Timestamped screenshots of late-night breakthrough moments when I had solved problems that had been keeping me awake for weeks. I methodically copied everything twice, creating redundant backups stored in different locations. If Mason wanted to play the game of corporate politics and credit theft, I would play it with the precision of a software engineer who documented everything. He thought he was smart, but I was about to prove that intelligence beats arrogance every time. Then my phone rang, and I saw HR's number flashing on the screen. "Harper, this is Patricia from Human Resources." The voice on the phone sounded official and slightly uncomfortable. "There's been some discussion about potential conflicts of interest regarding the recent project presentation. We've received a complaint that needs to be addressed." My blood turned to ice as I realized what was happening. Mason hadn't just stolen my work, he was now trying to paint me as the problem. The complaint was obviously his preemptive strike to discredit me before I could expose what he had done. He was probably claiming I was bitter about not getting recognition or that I was trying to take credit for his leadership. "I see," I managed to say, keeping my voice professional while my mind raced. "What kind of complaint?" "We'll need to schedule a meeting to discuss concerns about teamwork and project attribution. Please focus on collaborative approaches moving forward." The words felt like a script she was reading, probably written by Mason himself. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Then I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it insurance. If Mason wanted to play dirty, I would show him what real strategy looked like. The next morning, Mason acted like our hallway conversation had never happened. He strolled into the office wearing his usual confident smile and designer suit, approaching my desk with the casual air of someone who owned the world. The overnight transformation from threatening me to mentoring me would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparently manipulative. "Harper, great work yesterday," he said, perching on the edge of my desk like we were old friends. "Big opportunity ahead of us. The investors absolutely loved our pitch, and they're talking about moving forward with implementation." Our pitch. The possessive pronoun made my stomach turn, but I nodded like I was grateful for his acknowledgement. He winked at me like we were sharing some kind of inside joke, completely oblivious to the fact that I was documenting every word he said in my mental notebook. "I'm excited to see where this goes," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Inside, I was memorizing his exact words, adding them to the growing file of evidence that would eventually expose his fraud. His arrogance was becoming the weapon I would use to destroy him. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo as I watched Mason bask in glory that belonged to me. He started making grand promises to upper management about features and updates he couldn't possibly deliver because he didn't understand the fundamental architecture of the system. During team meetings, he would describe technical concepts incorrectly, forcing me to quietly correct course without embarrassing him publicly. I kept my head down and took careful notes, documenting every instance where his ignorance showed through his confident facade. He was like an actor who had memorized his lines without understanding the play, and eventually, someone would ask him to improvise. The patience required was excruciating, but I knew that rushing would only give him opportunities to cover his tracks. Every day felt like swallowing glass, but I maintained my professional demeanor while building an airtight case against him. Mason's ego was writing checks his knowledge couldn't cash, and I was collecting every single IOU. Then the call came that would give me the perfect opportunity to expose him. The investors had scheduled a live product demonstration for the following week. Mason practically glowed with excitement as he announced during our team meeting that he would be personally handling the presentation. "I want to show them the real vision behind this innovation," he declared, looking directly at me with that patronizing smile. "Harper, you'll assist behind the scenes, of course. Make sure everything runs smoothly while I focus on the big picture presentation." He said it like he was doing me a favor, giving me the privilege of watching him steal credit for my work in real time. Absolutely, I replied, matching his smile with one of my own. I'll make sure everything is perfect. What Mason didn't realize was that behind the scenes was exactly where I wanted to be. That's where the truth lived, in the code and logs and metadata that he couldn't fake or manipulate. While he performed for the investors, I would be in the perfect position to let my work speak for itself. I had to plant the seed carefully, but the opportunity was finally presenting itself. The night before the demonstration, I stayed late in the office under the pretense of final preparations. The building was empty except for security guards and the occasional cleaning crew, giving me the privacy I needed for the most crucial part of my plan. I opened the system's core files and began implementing something Mason would never think to look for. Buried deep in the metadata, invisible to end users but undeniable to anyone who knew where to look, I added my digital signature. Authorship tags, development timestamps, and commit histories that would clearly show who had actually built this system. One simple command line that would display the truth when activated. The beauty was in its subtlety. The watermarks wouldn't interfere with normal operation or even show up during Mason's surface-level presentation. But if anyone dug deeper into the system information, they would find my name embedded in every critical component. It was like signing my artwork before the gallery opening. As I saved the final changes, I whispered to my computer screen, "Tomorrow, the truth will speak for itself." Mason could practice his presentation all he wanted, but the code would tell the real story. The investors filed into our main conference room like judges entering a courtroom. I recognized several faces from previous meetings, including Thomas Caldwell and Victoria Price, both known for their technical backgrounds and sharp questions. Mason stood at the front of the room wearing his most expensive suit, radiating the kind of confidence that came from weeks of successful deception. He launched into his presentation with practiced ease, describing the system's capabilities like he had invented every feature personally. Everything ran smoothly through the initial demos, and I could see the investors nodding approvingly at what they were seeing. Mason's voice grew more confident with each passing minute as he fielded basic questions about functionality and user interface. Then Thomas Caldwell raised his hand with a technical question that made my pulse quicken. How exactly does the system handle data drift and recalibration in real-time scenarios? Mason's confident expression flickered for just a moment before he gestured toward me. "Let me have Harper demonstrate that particular feature," he said, trying to maintain his authoritative tone while clearly having no idea how to answer. I stepped forward calmly, my fingers already moving toward the keyboard. "I'd be happy to show you," I replied. As I began typing commands to demonstrate the recalibration process, something interesting appeared on the investors' private monitors that Mason couldn't see from his position. The system information panel automatically populated with technical details, including a field that clearly displayed, primary developer, Harper Quinn, lead architect. Mason continued his explanation, completely unaware that my name was now visible to every investor in the room. I maintained my professional demeanor, walking them through the technical process while the evidence of my authorship stared back at them from their screens. Thomas Caldwell's eyes met mine briefly, and I saw the exact moment he understood what he was looking at. I didn't need to make any accusations or dramatic announcements. The code was speaking louder than any words I could have used. Every technical demonstration revealed more metadata confirming my role as the system's creator. Victoria Price had pulled up additional diagnostic screens, and I could see her taking notes as she discovered layer after layer of my digital signature. The recalibration happens automatically based on these parameters, I explained, pointing to code that was clearly documented with my initials and timestamps. Mason nodded along, still oblivious to the revolution happening on screens he couldn't see. After the demonstration ended, I watched the investors file out of the conference room with expressions that hadn't been there when they arrived. Mason was still riding high on adrenaline, trying to shake hands and make small talk, but his usual charm seemed to be falling flat. The investors whispered among themselves in the hallway, occasionally glancing back toward our conference room. Mason's shoulders gradually began to stiffen as he realized something had shifted in the room's energy. The polite smiles from the investors looked forced, and several of them left without the enthusiastic goodbyes he had clearly expected. Thomas Caldwell gave me a meaningful look before he departed, one that told me my message had been received loud and clear. "Good presentation," Victoria Price said to Mason, but her tone was carefully neutral. When she turned to me, her voice carried more warmth. "Thank you for the technical demonstration, Harper. Very enlightening." As the last investor left, Mason stood in the empty conference room looking confused and slightly deflated. He knew something had gone wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. I began packing up my laptop, fighting to keep the satisfaction off my face. That evening, the audit request arrived in Mason's email inbox. The internal email that appeared in Mason's inbox was brief and official: external audit requested for Project Zenith. Verification of authorship and development timeline required for investor due diligence. Please prepare all relevant documentation. I was at my desk when Mason stormed over, his face flushed with anger and confusion. The email was copied to me as the technical lead, a title that hadn't been used for me before this week. Mason clutched his phone like it might explode, his usual composure completely shattered. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. Several coworkers looked up from their desks, clearly sensing the tension between us. I looked up slowly from my computer, meeting his furious gaze with calm professionalism. "I did my job, Mason. I demonstrated the system's capabilities to the investors just like you asked." The simplicity of my answer seemed to infuriate him more. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. "You think they'll believe you over me? I'm the director here." "They won't have to choose who to believe," I replied evenly. "The server logs and development history will speak for themselves." Mason cornered me in the parking lot that evening, clearly having waited for other employees to leave before confronting me. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows on his face as he stepped closer, trying to use his height and position to intimidate me. His usual polished demeanor had completely cracked, revealing the desperate man underneath. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he snarled, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You think they'll believe some junior developer over a director with 15 years of experience?" I tilted my head, studying his face like he was an interesting problem to solve. "They won't have to believe me at all, Mason. The commit logs, timestamped development files, and authorship records already told them everything they need to know." He stepped back as if I had physically struck him. The confidence that had carried him through months of stolen credit was evaporating as he realized the scope of what I had documented. For the first time since this whole mess began, Mason looked genuinely afraid. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice quieter now. "This could destroy my career. You should have thought about that before you tried to destroy mine." I walked past him toward my car, leaving him standing alone under the parking lot lights. By morning, he was under formal review. The office atmosphere changed overnight. Hushed conversations stopped when Mason walked by, and I noticed people avoiding eye contact with him in the hallways. Human Resources had scheduled a series of closed-door meetings, and Mason's usual confident swagger had been replaced by nervous energy and dark circles under his eyes. I maintained my normal routine, focusing on my work while the investigation unfolded around us. Colleagues who had previously treated me as Mason's subordinate began approaching me with technical questions, clearly understanding that the power dynamic had shifted. The respect in their voices was something I had never experienced before. During lunch, I overheard two senior developers discussing the situation. I always wondered how Mason understood those complex algorithms so quickly. Now it makes sense, he didn't. The validation felt better than any promotion could have. Mason avoided looking at me entirely, keeping his office door closed and declining to attend team meetings. The man who had stolen credit for my work was now afraid to be in the same room with me. Then the call came that would change everything. The investors requested a private meeting with me specifically. The conference room felt different this time. Instead of Mason commanding attention from the front, I sat across from Thomas Caldwell and Victoria Price with my laptop open and my documentation organized. They had requested this meeting within hours of completing their preliminary review of the audit materials. "Harper, we'd like you to walk us through the complete development process," Thomas said, his voice respectful in a way it had never been when Mason was in the room. From initial concept to final implementation. I opened my laptop and began displaying the comprehensive record I had maintained throughout the project. Every initial design document bore my name as the sole author. Every breakthrough moment was documented with timestamps and detailed explanations of my problem-solving process. Email threads showed me explaining complex concepts to Mason when he couldn't grasp the technical foundations. As I walked them through months of my work, I caught sight of Mason through the glass wall. He was pacing in his office, occasionally stopping to stare at our meeting with the expression of a man watching his career collapse in real time. Victoria Price was taking extensive notes, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated she understood exactly what she was seeing. "This is remarkably thorough documentation," she said. "And clearly establishes the development timeline and authorship." They didn't fire Mason immediately. But everyone knew it was just a matter of time. 2 days later, I compiled everything into a comprehensive digital package that would be impossible to refute or explain away. The secure folder contained chronologically organized documentation spanning the entire 6-month development period, original concept documents, detailed commit histories, patent applications I had quietly filed, and timestamp records that painted a clear picture of the project's true authorship. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced and verified, creating an airtight case that no amount of corporate politics could overcome. I had been building this documentation from day one, never imagining I would need it to defend my own work from theft. The irony wasn't lost on me that my methodical nature, something Mason had often mocked as over-engineering, was now his undoing. I submitted the folder through official channels, ensuring that legal, human resources, and executive leadership all received copies simultaneously. The timestamp on my submission read 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 6 months and 3 days after I had sent Mason the first email outlining my initial concept for the algorithm. The beauty of the evidence was that it required no interpretation or explanation. The dates, names, and technical details spoke for themselves with mathematical precision. The board couldn't ignore documentation that thorough and that damning. The official memo appeared in everyone's inbox at exactly 9 a.m. on Friday morning. Director Mason Trent has been terminated effective immediately for falsification of records and violation of intellectual property policies. Please direct any questions regarding his former projects to Harper Quinn, who will be assuming technical leadership responsibilities. I read the memo 3 times before the reality sank in. Mason's parking spot sat empty by noon, his office cleared out by security while curious employees watched from a respectful distance. The speed of his downfall was almost shocking, less than 2 weeks from his triumphant presentation to complete professional destruction. Office conversation buzzed with speculation and retrospective understanding. People were suddenly remembering all the times Mason had seemed unclear about technical details or had deferred complex questions to me. The signs had been there all along, but his position and competence had made everyone assume he was the mastermind. Nobody defended him. Not a single colleague spoke up to suggest the termination was unfair or rushed. His reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed by the evidence that he became a cautionary tale before he had even finished packing his personal items. But the story wasn't over yet. The investigators had uncovered something unexpected during their review. The call from CEO Amanda Richardson came as a complete surprise. Her assistant had scheduled a meeting for Monday morning, providing no details beyond discussion of Project Zenith and future opportunities. I spent the weekend wondering if I was about to face some kind of blame for the Mason situation, despite having done nothing but document my own work. Instead, I found myself sitting across from the CEO and 2 of our biggest investors in her executive conference room. "Harper, after reviewing the complete investigation results, we have a proposition for you," Amanda began, her tone more respectful than I had ever heard from company leadership. "The investors remain very interested in your algorithm, and they want to move forward with full implementation. However, they've specifically requested that you lead the development team for the next phase." She paused, studying my expression. "We're prepared to offer you the director position that Mason previously held, along with full credit and patent attribution for your work. Lead. Director. My own team, my own recognition, my own decision-making authority. Everything I had worked toward for years was suddenly being offered to me as compensation for what had been stolen. But I wasn't quite ready to accept their first offer. I had learned too much about negotiation to settle without ensuring my work was properly protected. Human Resources presented me with a standard statement crediting collaborative team development for the algorithm, the same kind of corporate language that had allowed Mason to steal credit in the first place. I read through it carefully, then slid the document back across the table without signing. I appreciate the gesture, but this isn't sufficient, I said calmly. I want my name explicitly listed as the primary inventor on all patent applications, with clear attribution in any public announcements or investor materials. The HR representative shifted uncomfortably. Well, that's somewhat unusual. The company typically maintains broader credit for intellectual property developed by employees. I opened my laptop and displayed the comprehensive documentation I had prepared. Given the unusual circumstances and the clear record of individual authorship, I believe explicit attribution is appropriate. I slid a folder across the table containing legal documentation I had prepared with the help of an intellectual property attorney. These are the terms I'm comfortable with for continuing in the director role. They huddled for a brief conference, then agreed to my conditions. Sometimes the only way to ensure fair treatment is to refuse to accept anything less. Within a week, the story hit industry news outlets. The headline in Tech Daily made me smile when I saw it over my morning coffee. Software engineer exposes director's fraud, assumes leadership role in major corporate restructuring. The article detailed the investigation without naming Mason specifically, but anyone in the industry would be able to connect the dots. My inbox flooded with congratulations from former colleagues, industry contacts, and even complete strangers who had read about the situation. LinkedIn connection requests poured in from recruiters and executives who wanted to discuss opportunities. The recognition felt surreal after years of watching other people take credit for work I had done. Mason's name appeared nowhere in the coverage. He had been so thoroughly erased from the narrative that it was like he had never existed. The algorithm was now publicly attributed to me, the patents bore my name, and the media coverage positioned me as an innovative leader rather than a victim of corporate theft. The professional validation was intoxicating, but I knew the real justice was still coming. Corporate consequences were just the beginning of Mason's problems. Among the flood of emails in my inbox, one subject line caught my attention. From Mason Trent, apology and explanation. My cursor hovered over it for several long moments as I debated whether reading his words would provide closure or just reopen old wounds. The email contained exactly what I expected. Excuses about pressure from upper management, claims that he had always intended to give me proper credit eventually, and vague mentions of personal difficulties that had clouded his judgment. He asked for understanding and suggested that we could work together to clear up any misunderstandings about the project development. I read it twice, then moved my cursor to the delete button. Mason's apology was just another attempt at manipulation, trying to rewrite history and minimize his deliberate theft of my work. Closure didn't require conversation with someone who still couldn't take full responsibility for his actions. Some bridges are meant to be burned. I deleted the email without responding and blocked his address for good measure. The real vindication came a week later when I received news about his attempts to find new employment. The quarterly investor meeting felt like stepping into an alternate reality. I stood at the front of the same glass conference room where Mason had once presented my work as his own, but this time my name was prominently displayed on every slide. The algorithm was explicitly credited to me, and the presentation materials clearly identified me as the project's lead architect and inventor. Thomas Caldwell introduced me to the room as the brilliant mind behind our most promising new technology, and the applause that followed felt genuine and earned. I walked through technical details that I had created, explaining design decisions that I had made, and answering questions about work that was undeniably mine. When Victoria Price asked about future development plans, I was able to provide detailed roadmaps because I understood every component of the system intimately. There was no nervous deflection or vague promises, just confident expertise backed by months of deep technical knowledge. As the meeting concluded and investors approached me with follow-up questions, I realized that this was what professional recognition actually felt like. Not stolen applause or borrowed authority, but respect earned through competence and innovation. I had saved one final observation for myself, a lesson that would guide everything I did moving forward. 6 months after Mason's termination, I stood in my new office, the same space where he had once plotted to steal credit for my work. The irony wasn't lost on me as I looked out the window at the parking lot where he had tried to intimidate me into silence. My team had grown to include some of the industry's most talented developers, all working on projects that bore my name and vision. During a recent industry conference, I had been invited to speak about leadership and innovation. The keynote speech gave me an opportunity to share something I had learned through this entire experience, though I was careful not to mention Mason by name or provide details that would identify him. People often say that success is the best revenge, I told the audience of developers and executives. But I disagree with that completely. I paused, looking out at faces that were listening intently to every word I spoke. Truth, spoken calmly and clearly in a room full of people who tried to silence you, that's better than any revenge you could imagine. Another pause as I let that sink in before delivering my final message. Remember this above everything else: your work, your worth, and your name belong to you. Guard them like they're oxygen, because in this industry, they might as well be. The applause that followed felt different from anything I had experienced before. It was the sound of people recognizing not just my technical skills, but my refusal to let someone else define my value or steal my identity. Mason Trent had taught me the most valuable lesson of my career, though not in the way he had intended. Sometimes the best education comes from watching someone else's arrogance destroy them while your integrity saves you.